My family called me a broke disgrace and told me you're on your own now. They didn't know I owned 3 companies, so I packed my bags without a word. They didn't expect they would need my help again within 5 days. I, 32M, sat at the dinner table that Thursday evening, watching my family celebrate my younger brother's promotion to senior associate at some mid-tier law firm. The champagne flowed freely, expensive bottles my father had been saving for a special occasion. My mother beamed with pride, adjusting the collar of her silk blouse as she recounted the news to anyone who would listen. My sister raised her glass for the third toast of the evening, and everyone clinked their crystal together with enthusiasm that felt almost aggressive. Nobody asked me how my day went. Nobody had asked me that in about 3 years. My father turned to me somewhere between the main course and dessert, his face flushed from the wine, and told me it was time I figured out my life. He said my brother had his career locked down at 30, and here I was at 32, still wearing thrift store clothes and driving a 15-year-old sedan. My mother nodded along, adding that she was embarrassed when her friends asked what I did for work. She said I mumbled something about consulting and computers, which sounded like code for unemployment. My sister laughed and said I should try getting a real job instead of whatever hobby I was pretending was a career. She worked in marketing at a pharmaceutical company and never missed an opportunity to mention her 6-figure salary. She told me I could probably get an entry-level position somewhere if I actually tried, maybe as an assistant or in the mailroom. My brother suggested I should go back to school, get an MBA like he did, and stop wasting my potential. The word potential hung in the air like an accusation. I listened to all of it without responding. I had learned years ago that defending myself only made things worse. They had already decided who I was in their minds, and nothing I said would change that narrative. To them, I was the family disappointment, the eldest son who had somehow squandered every advantage they had given me. My father set down his fork with a heavy clink and said we needed to talk seriously. He told me that he and my mother had discussed it, and they had decided they were done supporting me. The room went quiet except for the sound of the ceiling fan rotating overhead. He said I was on my own now, effective immediately. No more staying in their house rent-free, no more family dinners, no more handouts. He told me I had until the end of the month to find somewhere else to live. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin and said it broke her heart, but they had enabled me long enough. Tough love was what I needed, she said. My sister nodded approvingly and muttered something about how this should have happened years ago. My brother stayed silent, but I could see the agreement in his eyes. The thing is, I hadn't lived with my parents in over a decade. I owned a small house across town that I had paid for in cash 4 years ago. I drove an old car because I preferred reliability over status symbols. I wore simple clothes because I spent most of my time working from home and saw no point in expensive fashion. I had dinner with my family once a week because my mother had insisted it was important to stay connected, and I had foolishly believed that eventually they might ask about my actual life. They never did. I stood up from the table and told them I understood. My father looked surprised that I wasn't arguing. He seemed almost disappointed, as if he had been preparing for a confrontation that never came. I thanked my mother for dinner and told them all I wished my brother congratulations on his promotion. Then I walked out of that house for what I knew would be the last time. The drive home took 15 minutes through quiet suburban streets. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, letting the reality of the situation settle over me. My family had just disowned me based on a completely fictional version of my life that they had constructed in their own minds. They had never asked what I actually did for work. They had never visited my house. They had never shown even a passing curiosity about my life beyond their assumptions. I walked inside and poured myself a drink, then opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. 3 browser tabs, 3 different dashboards. The first company I had started 8 years ago developed automation software for small businesses. It generated roughly $2 million in annual profit and required about 10 hours of my attention per week, thanks to the team I had built. The second company created educational apps for children with learning disabilities. It was more of a passion project, but it had grown steadily and now brought in around $1 million annually. The third was my newest venture, a cybersecurity consulting firm that I had launched 3 years ago. It was already pulling in $3 million a year and growing faster than I had projected. I wasn't wealthy by billionaire standards, but I was comfortable. Very comfortable. I had more money than I knew what to do with, investments that would sustain me for life, and the freedom to work on projects I actually cared about. And my family had spent years treating me like a charity case without ever bothering to ask a single question. The irony was almost funny. Almost. I spent that weekend doing absolutely nothing related to my family. I didn't call them, didn't text them, didn't think about them beyond the occasional flash of anger that I quickly suppressed. On Monday morning, I had a video conference with my management team across all 3 companies. Business was good. We were closing a major deal with a healthcare network that would expand our cybersecurity operations significantly. The educational app had just been featured in a major teaching publication. The automation software was being considered by a Fortune 500 company for enterprise-wide implementation. My phone rang Tuesday afternoon. My sister. I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour later, and again I ignored it. A text message followed asking me to call her back, that it was important. I deleted it without responding. Wednesday brought a call from my mother. Then my father. Then my brother. I ignored all of them. Whatever they wanted, I had no interest in hearing it. They had made their position clear, and I was simply respecting their wishes. I was on my own now, just like they wanted. Thursday morning, my phone started ringing before 7. My mother, then my father, then my sister twice in a row. A string of text messages followed, each one more urgent than the last. Something about an emergency, about needing to talk immediately, about family obligations. I skimmed them while drinking my coffee and felt nothing but a distant sense of curiosity about what could possibly constitute an emergency 4 days after they had kicked me out of the family. The voicemail from my father finally explained it. His voice was different than I had ever heard it, shaky and small. He told me that my brother had been fired. Not just fired, but terminated for cause and escorted from the building by security. Something about discrepancies in client billing, potential fraud, an investigation that had apparently been ongoing for months. The law firm was considering legal action. My brother was facing possible criminal charges. They had already seized his accounts as part of the investigation. My father said they needed help. They needed money for lawyers, good lawyers, the kind that cost thousands per hour. My brother's savings were frozen. My parents had some retirement funds, but not enough, not for something like this. My sister had offered what she could, but it wasn't nearly sufficient. He said he knew they had been hard on me at dinner last week, but family was family, and right now they needed me to step up. The message ended with him saying he hoped I could borrow some money, maybe take out a loan, perhaps ask my friends if any of them knew any lawyers who might work on a payment plan. He said they would pay me back eventually, once this was all sorted out. I listened to the voicemail 3 times, and each time the absurdity of it grew sharper. They thought I needed to borrow money. They thought I would need to ask friends for favors. They had spent years dismissing my success as imaginary, and now, in their moment of crisis, they still couldn't conceive of the possibility that they had been wrong. More calls came throughout the day. My mother left a tearful voicemail begging me to come home, saying they needed to talk as a family. My sister sent a long text message explaining that she knew we had our differences, but our brother needed us now, and surely I could find a way to contribute something, even if it was just a small amount. Every message carried the same underlying assumption, that I was broke, struggling, barely getting by, but maybe if I really tried, I could scrape together something to help. I didn't respond to any of them. Friday morning, my father showed up at my office. Except he didn't know it was my office. The building downtown housed my cybersecurity firm across the top 2 floors. He had somehow tracked down an address associated with my name and assumed I worked there in some junior capacity. I watched on the security camera feed as he spoke to the receptionist, asking if I was available, saying he was my father and it was a family emergency. My head of operations called my desk and asked if I wanted her to send him up. I thought about it for a long moment, then told her to bring him to the conference room. I made him wait 20 minutes. Not out of cruelty, but because I genuinely had a meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. When I finally walked into the conference room, my father was pacing by the windows, looking out over the city. He turned when I entered, and I saw the exhaustion in his face, the fear that had settled into the lines around his eyes. He asked me what I was doing there, in this building, in this conference room that looked like it belonged to someone important. I told him I worked there. He asked doing what, and I told him I owned the company. Both floors, 70 employees, 30 million in annual revenue, and growing. I watched the information fail to process across his face. He shook his head and said that wasn't possible, that I couldn't own a company like this, that I drove an old car and wore cheap clothes and never talked about work. I told him he never asked. Not once in 8 years had he or anyone else in the family asked me what I actually did, how my businesses were performing, whether I was happy or successful or fulfilled. They had decided I was a failure and never questioned that assumption. He sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs and asked why I never told them. I asked him why I would share anything with people who had already made up their minds about who I was. I told him about my other 2 companies, about my house, about the fact that I had been financially independent since my mid-20s. I told him that every Thursday dinner for the past 3 years, I had sat there listening to them mock my life while I paid more in taxes than my brother made in salary. My father's face went through several shades of red and white. He asked why I let them treat me that way if I was so successful. I told him I kept hoping that eventually someone would care enough to ask, that someone would see past their own assumptions and wonder if maybe they had the story wrong, that my family would treat me like a person instead of a project. Then he did exactly what I expected. He pivoted to my brother's situation, saying that regardless of our past issues, family helped family in times of crisis. He told me my brother was facing serious charges, that the lawyers they needed cost more than they had available, that this could ruin his entire life. He said I had the resources to help, and didn't I think I owed it to my family after they had supported me for so many years? I let him finish his entire speech before I responded. I told him I didn't owe them anything. They hadn't supported me. They had tolerated me at best and mocked me at worst. They had spent years making it clear that I was the family embarrassment, the cautionary tale, the example of wasted potential. They had literally told me I was on my own 5 days ago. I was simply taking them at their word. My father's voice rose as he told me I was being petty and vindictive. He said this was about my brother's future, about keeping him out of prison, about doing the right thing. I asked him why I should bail out someone who had suggested I get a job in a mailroom less than a week ago. Why should I save someone who had laughed along with everyone else at my expense for years? He played the family card again, saying blood was thicker than water. I told him the full phrase was actually that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, meaning chosen bonds matter more than biological ones. And my family had spent years showing me exactly how thin our bonds actually were. Then he tried anger, standing up and telling me I was being selfish and cruel, that people made mistakes and said things they didn't mean, but I was willing to let my own brother's life be destroyed over hurt feelings. I reminded him that my brother's life was being destroyed by his own choices, by whatever fraud he had committed, not by my refusal to fix his problems. I told him that actions had consequences, and maybe this was the tough love they were always saying I needed, just pointed in a different direction. My father left the conference room without another word. I watched him go, feeling nothing but a hollow sense of completion. The confrontation I had never wanted had finally happened, and it had gone exactly as I had expected. Update 1. The weekend brought a new wave of contact attempts. My mother called every few hours, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. She apologized for the dinner, said they had been too harsh, claimed they had always been proud of me deep down. She said she didn't understand why I had hidden my success, but that didn't matter now. What mattered was family coming together. I didn't respond. My sister showed up at my house Sunday evening. I watched her through the doorbell camera as she rang repeatedly, then knocked, then finally left a note tucked into my door frame. The note said she understood I was angry, but our brother needed us, and she was begging me to reconsider. She wrote that she had been wrong about a lot of things, that she was sorry, but those apologies could wait until after this crisis was resolved. The apologies could wait. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. They weren't sorry for how they had treated me. They were sorry that their treatment had consequences. Monday morning, I received an email from a lawyer representing my brother. It was a formal request for financial assistance, outlining the legal situation and the estimated costs of proper representation. The email suggested that as a successful business owner, I had both the means and the familial obligation to assist in this matter. It included language about family support structures and mutual aid during times of crisis. I forwarded it to my own attorney with a note asking him to handle any further communication. He called me an hour later and asked if I wanted him to respond at all. I told him to send a brief letter declining involvement and requesting no further contact. He asked if I was sure, mentioned something about potential family reconciliation down the road. I told him I was certain. My brother called Tuesday from a number I didn't recognize. I answered without thinking and immediately regretted it. He asked me if I was really going to let him go to prison. His voice was different, smaller than I had ever heard it. He said he had made mistakes, that he had gotten in over his head, that he wasn't a criminal, just someone who had made bad choices under pressure. I asked him if he remembered calling me a broke disgrace. He was silent for a moment, then said that was different, that he hadn't meant it the way it sounded. I asked him how else it could have been meant. He said families said things in the heat of the moment, that I was blowing it out of proportion, that this wasn't the time to be holding grudges. I told him that everything they had said at that dinner was said stone cold sober, during a celebration, with deliberate intention. There was no heat of the moment. There was just years of accumulated contempt finally expressed openly. I told him I hoped his legal situation worked out, but I wouldn't be participating in the solution. He called me selfish and heartless before hanging up. The words didn't sting the way he intended. They just confirmed what I already knew about how my family viewed me. Update 2. 3 weeks passed. I stopped answering unknown numbers and set up filters for my email. My attorney sent a cease and desist letter after the 5th contact from my brother's lawyer. The calls from my parents gradually decreased from several times a day to once every few days to finally stopping altogether. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my family had managed to scrape together enough for a decent attorney, though not the high-powered legal team they had initially wanted. My brother had accepted a plea deal that involved restitution, probation, and community service, but no jail time. The law firm had agreed not to pursue criminal charges in exchange for repayment of the misappropriated funds. My parents had taken a second mortgage on their house. My sister had emptied her savings account. They had all made it work without me, which was exactly what they had told me to do just a month earlier. I ran into my mother at a grocery store on a Thursday afternoon. She saw me first, and I watched her face cycle through several emotions before settling on something between anger and grief. She approached me in the produce section and asked how I could live with myself. I told her quite comfortably. She said I had abandoned my family when they needed me most. I corrected her and said I had simply accepted their decision to cut me off. She insisted that was different, that they had been frustrated and spoke without thinking, while I was deliberately withholding help during a crisis. I asked her if she understood that to me, there was no functional difference. In both cases, the family had made a choice about what I was worth to them. She told me my brother had almost gone to prison. I told her my brother had almost gone to prison because he committed fraud, not because I refused to bail him out. She said I could have prevented so much suffering, so much stress, so much financial damage to the family. I asked her how she thought I felt sitting at that dinner table being called a disgrace. She said that was completely different, that those were just words, while my brother's situation was a real crisis with real consequences. I told her that her inability to see the equivalence was exactly why I had made the choice I did. Words had consequences too. Years of dismissive words, mocking words, cruel words had consequences that were just as real as legal troubles. She asked me what I wanted from them. An apology? Groveling? I told her I didn't want anything anymore. The time when an apology might have mattered had passed. They had shown me who they were, and I had finally believed them. My mother stood there with her shopping cart between us and told me I had become someone she didn't recognize. I told her she had never recognized me to begin with, so nothing had really changed. Then I finished selecting my vegetables and walked away. Update 3. 6 months have passed since that dinner. I don't attend Thursday family meals anymore. I haven't spoken to my father or siblings since the various confrontations. My mother sends occasional text messages that I don't respond to, usually around holidays or birthdays, saying the door is always open if I want to reconcile. The door was always open before too. I was the one who kept walking through it, hoping that this time would be different, that someone would finally ask about my life, that someone would see me as something other than their predetermined narrative of failure. My businesses continue to grow. The cybersecurity firm just landed a government contract that will triple our revenue over the next 2 years. The automation software company is expanding internationally. The educational app won an industry award for innovation in accessible learning. I'm dating someone I met at a tech conference, someone who asked me what I did for work on our first conversation, and then asked follow-up questions because she was genuinely interested. She knows my family story and has never suggested I should try to fix things. She understands that some bridges are supposed to burn. I heard my brother successfully completed his probation and is working at a small firm doing contract legal work. My sister got engaged. My parents are apparently still recovering financially from the second mortgage and legal fees. I know these things because mutual acquaintances occasionally mention them, usually followed by a comment about how sad it is that our family fell apart. But the family didn't fall apart. It was never together to begin with. It was just held in place by my willingness to be the person they needed me to be, even when that person bore no resemblance to who I actually was. People often ask me if I regret my decision, if I wish I had handled things differently. The answer is no. Not because I take any joy in my family's struggles, but because I finally chose myself over their comfort. I spent years being the family disappointment, the punchline, the cautionary tale. They told me I was on my own, and I took them seriously. Sometimes the trash takes itself out. Sometimes you just have to let it go. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe us for more such real-life-based stories. Thanks in advance.